Hello everyone, welcome to True Words, a Shingon Buddhist podcast. We are on episode 19, and I'm Andrew.
And I'm Reverend Kosho Finch.
So today, our topic is going to be the role of faith in Buddhism. And as Kosho Sensei and I always like to joke around, we say faith is the F word in Buddhism because it's so often avoided or shunned as a term.
Yes, especially in the West. It seems that nobody wants to use this particular F word, or they will try to find every reason not to, or even say that it doesn't apply in Buddhism.
Which I think it definitely has a lot of root in Buddhism. I mean, one of the core Mahayana texts is awakening of faith in the Mahayana. And of course, faith shows up in other places in Buddhism as well. We have faith as one of the five roots, or the five powers. And that sort of concept shows up again and again in different stages of Buddhist practice.
I would agree. I think a lot of the hesitancy to use the word faith or apply it probably comes from, especially in the West anyway, two roots, I guess we could say. One is that people coming to Buddhism are usually leaving some other spiritual path, and they had an idea of faith in that particular spiritual path, and they're looking for a completely different paradigm when they come to Buddhism. And second, it's probably all too often comes with a lot of baggage from other spiritual systems that as soon as you use the word, it's just a very loaded term. So it often turns people off. Or, you say it and probably there's a lot of images that go through people's mind as to, what's being said. Or as I've heard people say, it's, to use a very American kind of slang, it's a cop-out. Somebody doesn't want to answer the question, so they say have faith or something like this. So I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around faith from a Buddhist perspective. So hopefully we can shed some light on why it's not a bad F word when it's applied to Buddhism.
So I guess part of this is going to be having to redefine the idea of faith and this sort of concept. So how do you think we should be defining this word when we're using it?
So I guess you could start off looking at faith from a Buddhist perspective. And I'll say, as somebody who found Buddhism and wasn't born into a Buddhist family, that I didn't quite understand the role of faith initially. So I probably had many of the same misconceptions that people sometimes come to me with. So what I kind of, hopefully, I guess thankfully, not too far into my exploration of Buddhism, realized was, at least in a Buddhist context, faith is something you build, and it has more to do with your introspection and analysis of the teaching, and that from that you develop and build faith, rather than it be a concept that is a prerequisite for entry into the Buddhist world. So many other spiritual systems that I explored early on in my sort of wanderings and being interested in spirituality generally, it seemed like faith was something you had to have before you could understand anything else. And there was this encouragement to have faith, or oftentimes just have faith, especially when there was a lack of understanding of either the teaching or something happening to you in life. And my question was always, for a lot of people, then how do you build faith? And there may be good answers out there for developing faith from other systems, but I think a lot of people, and especially the younger version of me, were turned off by someone using it as kind of a means to deflect questions or to even discourage questioning. So faith was used as a shield in this way. And what I found in Buddhism was faith was something you were encouraged to construct or build, and there were actually methods provided for doing so. So I guess I could probably my idea of faith, there's probably many ideas or aspects of faith. I definitely do have strong faith, as maybe people would just on the face of it think of the word, but also a faith that's developed through study, practice, experience, and so maybe confidence would be a better word to apply in a Buddhist context, is that having read widely within Buddhist literature, having practiced several methods, having gotten some results, that I then have confidence in those results and those teachings, and so I hold on to them. So I think maybe that's a better way for people to understand the concept of faith from a Buddhist standpoint, that at least what's encouraged is not blind faith. And yes, there are people who probably have blind faith in Buddhism, but if we were to look at what the Buddha himself encouraged and what Buddhist texts encourage and teachers encourage, it is that people look into the teaching, look at what the Buddha was talking about, and attempt to develop their own idea and their own understanding, and then to have faith or confidence in those concepts.
I like how you use the word confidence, because for me it's very much true in the same sense as well. Before I get into that though, partly over the years I've really seen the importance of faith show up in my practice, because there are a lot of times when I think, if I hadn't built this faith, if I hadn't built this confidence in the teachings, would I be trying out all of the practices that I do? Would I even give them a chance, or would I just read them and think, that's nice, but will it actually work? And if I have that sort of initial doubt and I don't go to seek to sort of resolve it and try it out, if I don't have that initial sort of fine amount of faith, then does it actually work? Because that's the initial thing that really starts the practice, in the sense that if I didn't have faith in, say, my teachers, if I didn't trust my teachers, if I didn't have confidence in my teachers, would I respect what they were teaching me as much? Would I really accept it, or would I just think, they're just talking and then this really doesn't affect me? So going with that, I think that initial little bit of faith is what got me started, but then as I started trying and practicing the Buddhist teachings, it really showed me that this faith is going to continually be built and be reinforced and strengthened.
I would agree. I think faith, so especially in the Theravada tradition, faith is kind of described as a seed. And it's sort of the first thing you need to plant in a practice. And then on that faith foundation, you build things like awareness and mindfulness and mind concentration, and you're building wisdom. But if you don't have confidence in your teacher, the teaching that you're engaged with, you're going to be sort of undermining yourself constantly through your practice, thinking, am I really getting anywhere? Is this beneficial? So that sort of constant questioning, there definitely should be an ongoing questioning, an ongoing introspection of your practice, but you have to have some, I think confidence is probably a good word here, some kind of confidence in that practice. It's really no different than getting on an airplane. I have confidence, I have faith that the pilot is properly trained and is capable of flying, and we're going to arrive at the destination safely, even though I haven't looked into their credentials or checked their flight log or anything like that. There's sort of a system built around that person that gives me some level of confidence. So I say, okay, I'll take the leap of faith and fly up in the air with this person. So, sometimes that could probably be a way for people to look at, starting off. There has to be some sort of indication of trustworthiness in the teaching, which is oftentimes why I think we've been encouraging people to seek out the Dharma from sources that have some legitimacy. As I always tell people, teachers that are not afraid to invite in other teachers or work with other teachers is a good indication. So having that base level of confidence is important. And then it's something that you strengthen over time. So, the amount of faith that I had on day one when I decided to start using the title Buddhist is not equal to the amount of faith that I have today. It's something that continually is reinforced, buttressed, so to speak, and grows. But I think that, again, sometimes, I think even for myself, the idea of faith was something that came slowly in the beginning. But when I really look back, I realized I had it. I had, a deep curiosity that was built on something. And I think that definitely was a reflection of some sort of faith in the teaching and faith in the people that I learned from.
Yeah. So I think talking about faith, we also have to talk about the other side of that, which is doubt. And it brings up a Zen saying in my mind. Actually, Zen, Chan, one of the two, possibly both. But the saying goes, small doubts lead to small awakenings, and big doubts lead to big awakenings. No doubt leads to no awakening. So I thought this was a very interesting saying when I first heard of it. I was thinking, wow, isn't it best to not have any doubts in the Dharma and the teachings in the entire system of Buddhism? But actually, in the saying, it's saying that without that sort of question, we don't really get anywhere. And it's through this doubt, it's through this questioning that we build our faith, through these experiences, through these practices, and really seeing for ourselves that this is what we can do and this is the result of what we do, that reinforces that and really develops that confidence and trust within us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. I think if you pick up any Buddhist sutra, you'll see that almost everything starts with a question. So at some point, even sitting at the foot of the Buddha, the students had questions, and questions are encouraged. I think looking into the Dharma is impossible without having some questions about it, and that is a kind of healthy form of doubt. So it has to be present, and from that, I think your faith is only going to be strengthened. So I would say definitely from that perspective, complete utter blind faith isn't encouraged, but we do have to have a healthy relationship and open-mindedness when we come to the teaching. And I would say that definitely I've had faith in certain aspects of my practice, and it's only through the areas where I have doubt or questions, or when I talk to someone else and they raise a question and I go, I don't actually know the answer to that, or how could I explain that? And then looking into that information, that my faith is reinforced. So one thing that always impressed me about the Buddhist teaching was I'd have a certain set of questions, and I'd go to text and try to find the answers. And caveat for our listeners, I'm probably fall into the more geeky side of Buddhism, willingness to spend hours in the library reading obscure texts. But I was always encouraged by the texts having additional questions that I had never thought about, and answers that took me places I had never considered. So that was one thing that always impressed me about the Buddhist teaching, and still holds true for today. But starting off, I think building some level of faith, it doesn't, reading some of the early, Pali texts, for example, and looking at the questions the Buddhist disciples asked, what kind of questions they had, even looking at the first sermon, then you see how faith is built. It's built about, things that are very important to human life. It's your life itself, the kind of things that every human being goes through. I think sometimes online we get into questions, sort of really big philosophical questions, or else kind of the minutia of sculpture or artistic works or historical analysis. But really it goes back to the basic questions of being a human being, of being born, getting older, getting sick at times. And these are times when the thing that's going to support us most is faith. that kind of energy is going to be really important and to apply to those situations and to help us continue to do some practice. And that's the times when oftentimes the logical mind is less useful. If we're getting sick, it doesn't help to rationalize, that the flu will pass in a few days. You don't feel good. But faith is something that, I think is going to help our practice and help our understanding of the emotions and the kind of inner life of the human being, an area where other aspects or, I think especially the logical aspect of the mind is less useful.
So, I was wondering, what do you think that we should have faith in, most importantly?
Well, that's a good question. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that. I would say probably, I guess the thing that I encourage most often is people's own experience. So other parts of the world, even within this country, certain things are taken without question. So I'll use other places where there are Shingon temples as examples. So in Hawaii and Brazil, there are Shingon temples, and I've talked to heads of temples in both places, and the people in both places tend to have a certain level of certainty in things that maybe other people in the world don't have such strong certainty. So in Hawaii, I think the typical person has a certain ideas that go without question, and one of those probably is the reality of ghosts. So if you go around the Hawaiian Islands, most people, it's something that isn't questioned. Yes, ghosts exist, and that flows into even state and government office buildings will ask for a kahuna or Buddhist priest or somebody to come to do a blessing before a new building is inhabited, or after renovation of an old building. And these things they happen, and there's no question about it. A lot of the Shingon temples in Brazil have had the experience where local people come and ask for blessings related to curses and black magic. And the people there, it goes without saying that these are absolutely true occurrences and phenomena. And then I think in the United States, people have kind of like same level of certainty when it comes to scientific exploration and understanding of things. Even if they don't have they can't personally explain certain scientific ideas, they have a very strong faith in them. So with such a diverse kind of, local understanding, I always encourage people to have faith in their experience. So whatever they have had the experience of, if they found that chanting worked for them, if they found that meditation worked for them, some people have, reported to me that they have a very strong spiritual experience with regard to pilgrimage. Others, when they met a certain person, I say that's their experience, and so they should use that as the starting point of faith, and use that as a starting point of their spiritual practice. So that's probably the most important part of faith, or the most important aspect of faith. It's just, what is your experience, and then begin from there and start that as your central point of your exploration.
Gotcha. Thanks. So building on that, I would say that I would add, like you said, it's very important to have faith in your experiences, and I think also have faith in yourself, because the path to enlightenment is a very, very long and arduous one. And I think for a lot of people, especially me when I was beginning, I was thinking, enlightenment seems so far away. Will I ever be able to get there? And it's a lot of doubt. It's a lot of, wow, I'm here on level 0 and I have to get to I don't know how many levels before I can get even anywhere close to enlightenment. And I think having that faith in myself, that knowing that, I have the potential to do this, I have the capabilities to do this, just as how all other sentient beings have this capability as well. Having that faith was very powerful and very helpful for me as I was progressing, always reminding myself that I am capable and that all sentient beings are capable as well, so that I can effectively help myself and help others along the way.
I would agree. I think for myself, I took a lot of inspiration from especially early Buddhist teachers, the things they had to go through, the energy that they exhibited in teaching, and their hardship. Having lived in Asia for a while and seen some of the places where people practiced, some of the temples that people lived in, I'd have to find a word more evocative than austere to describe some of the living conditions. But realizing that, they came to these places willingly and did practice, and then looking at the philosophical works that they developed and that came out of that, I thought, okay, this is a very deep teaching, and I think those things strengthened my faith in that teaching and in those teachers as well. So, again, I guess, going back to, what is your experience? That's an important part. I think with no experience, though, people can maybe build faith starting at a micro level. So having some interest in the Buddhist teaching, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably have some interest in the Buddhist teaching. Exploring, the life of the Buddha, what would motivate someone to leave the life of a prince who had everything and was very wealthy. If you, probably translate that story to a modern version, and let's say, you have the CEO of a very successful Silicon Valley company who has everything and life is going very well, and they decide to leave that and seek out, spiritual practice. That would probably leave a lot of people wondering, if they had just gotten completely stressed out or not, and then they return and they appear to be a very wise and engaged teacher and only focused and interested in helping others. I think it would probably inspire a lot of people and probably engender in them faith. So from even that kind of basic level, I think faith can be constructed. When I was in high school, our high school had assigned Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha to all the students to read, and then there was a pretty big discussion. And since it was a Catholic high school, I think they probably after my class stopped assigning it, because I'd say a majority of students said, well, this is really inspiring and it makes a lot of sense and we can really relate to it. And I remember the teacher at one point saying, that's not the conclusion you're supposed to draw. But I think that actually started people looking at life differently. And I could say, that could be the starting point of faith. So faith doesn't have to be so big at the beginning, but we are talking about some pretty big issues in human life. As I often say, many of us in the West are armchair Buddhists. We read popular books on Buddhism. Maybe we don't have a very strong practice. We have a kind of intellectual curiosity about the Buddhist teaching. And that sometimes doesn't translate into being very helpful when life throws us a curveball or things get difficult. So developing faith is very important for those times. Are we still drawn back to our practice when life gets difficult? As we find ourselves getting older, or, we feel the onset of a midlife crisis. Do we run away from practice, or do we engage more deeply in practice? I think those are the times when faith is really important and can be seen to be very helpful.
Yeah, definitely. And I think in that, having faith, especially in this context of practice, I think faith is something that oftentimes precedes practice, or it comes maybe just a little bit right before it. Mm-hmm. Because through this faith, we take that initial step, and then we try the practice and whatnot. And then after seeing the results, it feeds back into that faith, and then we think that, okay, so this worked, let's try other things. Let's try doing more of this, or doing a different kind of practice, and seeing if adding that on improves our progression. And eventually, this is the kind of fuel that will keep us running all the way up until we hit our obstacles, and then hopefully by then we'll have enough fuel to run right through it or run past it.
I think so. Definitely for myself, especially in the early days, there were times when there were a lot of obstacles just about life in general, and I was still fairly new to Buddhist practice, so I didn't necessarily go to my practice for, specifically for refuge. So that was not the first place I turned. And then later, I think as faith increased, that was, where I went to find answers. And so if we're looking at Buddhism as a source of, answers about life's toughest questions, then it is something that we need to, develop confidence in, and it's only going to benefit us. I think for, people new to Buddhist teaching, one of the things that probably confuses them or is an obstacle to the development of faith is probably, obviously the biggest practice style in traditional Buddhist countries, temples, peoples is a devotional style. So Westerners come to Buddhism thinking Buddhism is all meditation. And then if they do see, they travel to Thailand or Japan or China or something, or they see, a temple in their community that is primarily being used by people who are, recent immigrants to the United States, they may say, well, it has this devotional style, and I don't want that style of Buddhism. And I think that sometimes turns people off. And so sometimes the dominant form of Buddhist practice is misinterpreted as requiring blind faith or this kind of unquestioned allegiance. And I think that just needs to be stated that is, a form of Buddhist practice. It's just as helpful as other forms, but shouldn't turn people off from thinking that somehow there's not more to Buddhist teaching or Buddhist practice. It's just, one style. I think there's a lot of people, when I'm in the temple and, people come from a more traditional background, there's a, unquestioned, very open heart style of practice. But I find that their practice helps them in the toughest times of life, where people who are new are really struggling with a lot of other issues. And it was a very kind of eye-opening experience for me to see how helped people were by that devotional style, even though maybe their philosophical understanding of Buddhism wasn't terribly deep. Having the kind of overt devotional, very strong faith style was actually very transformative for them. So it's not something to be looked down upon. I think it functions slightly differently in Buddhism than other religions, but that doesn't mean it's not equally as valid or useful. So hopefully if we think about it a little bit more in terms of confidence, it'll be something that doesn't scare us away.
Definitely. And of course there are 84,000 Dharma doors, so any one is valid.
Yeah, unfortunately in the West, the primary Dharma door, the only one that's being shown to people, is meditation, or especially silent meditation. And there are so many different forms of practice within Buddhism that I think people would be surprised. And I think if they look, deeply even at the faith traditions that they may have started with, they'll probably find a diversity of practice there that wasn't evident to them. I can say that was true for me as well. The deeper I studied Buddhism, the more deeply I had an understanding of other faith traditions and appreciation for them. So, I have a stronger appreciation for faith now than I did initially. But definitely, my faith was something that was built, and I would say, probably quite honestly, something that continues to strengthen as my practice. I have more time into my practice, so that kind of confidence has been very important. And as when things are difficult, especially, it has been very helpful. So.
All right. Is there anything else that you wanted to add today?
I think for people to remember too that Buddhism deals with things that, the primary thing that we in the West have faith in is scientific inquiry, which is good. And just to keep in mind that a lot of scientific inquiry is not focused on the inner life of the person, nor may it ever be. It's going to be difficult to do, kind of third-person observation of the inner experience of a person. But we all have faith and confidence in the deliciousness of our favorite ice cream. And so Buddhism, I think, has a tremendous amount to contribute to the understanding of the inner life of the human being, and probably would be a good starting point for even scientific inquiry. So if we sort of separate some of these things out and realize that what Buddhism really is offering, I think it's a easier stepping stone into a life of faith in the Buddhist perspective, or building this type of confidence. And if people are curious, I would recommend, of course, the Kalama Sutta, where the Buddha exhorts the Kalama people into, how to build this kind of confidence, how to have inquiry, is encouraging them to rigorously question things, and would probably be pretty surprising or eye-opening if people are coming from a different faith tradition.
All right. Thank you, Sensei.
Thank you.